All right. We're gonna be waiting a few minutes just to give people time to join. So if you are joining now, just be patient for a couple of minutes while we let additional participants filter on in. I know a lot of people are probably coming off that last session for CPE as well. So there's a good possibility people need to run and get coffee or take a quick bio break. So we're going to just wait a couple of more minutes and give everybody a chance to filter in. In the meantime, as people are coming in, and I will probably also announce this again before we get started, I will be awarding participation. We're going to take it old school, kind of like when we were all back in our secondary days of elementary and secondary school. So throughout, if anybody submits questions or information that they have questions about, then your name will get added to a list, and I will be drawing one of those names after and having the crypto CFOs help facilitate getting you a gift card for participating. So make sure that you ask questions if you have them as we go through. We are going to give it about another 1 to 2 minutes just to give participants time to join, and then we will kick off with the required slides before we dive into the actual meat of the presentation. So I am going to give everybody a few. And I'm curious, for those who have joined, if anybody wants to share if they think they're joining from like far away in relationship, I guess, to me. I'm sitting in Florida. Then I'm curious to see who's joining from further away. Taylor's coming from Costa Rica. Everyone's jealous of your location, especially Brandon. Snow on the ground. I don't blame you. I'm in Florida, so I can't complain too much. My windows are open right now, albeit it's cool out, but my windows are still open. Reno, California. Sweet. We're gonna give it 1 more minute and then I'm gonna kick off, guys. I could hum the Jeopardy theme song. That might be fun. Not really. Okay. As a reminder, in case you weren't on when you very first joined the hour, I will be awarding a gift card for participation. So make sure you submit questions or Q&A. There's also a Q&A session at the end. I am going to go ahead and start working through the ever fun requirements at the beginning. So this is a CPE worthy session. Continuing education certificates will be emailed to the address that you provided when you registered. So please allow up to 1 week to receive the email before you contact the crypto CFO guys. Don't contact me. I'm not going to help you. We use Accredible to issue CE certificates. You can access all of your certificates directly from the website that's listed on the screen. If you need to and haven't already done this, feel free to take a screenshot. Please check your spam folder. And then you can email Brandon at cryptocfos.com for any missing certificates. And that's a little screenshot example of the certificate of completion. To earn CPE, the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, or NASBA as all of us know them, sponsor identification numbers. Their identification number for this CPE is 49149,755. Crypto CFOs is registered with the National Association of the State Boards of Accountancy, or NASBA, as a sponsor of continuing professional education on the National Registry of CPE sponsors. State boards of accountancy have final authority on the acceptance of individual courses for CPE credit. Complaints regarding registered sponsors may be submitted to the National Registry of CPE sponsors through its website. Again, screenshot that website if you just think we are all terrible and you deserve CPE that you're not getting, which is not the case. So we'll move on. To earn CPE, one NASBA CPE credit requires 4 polling questions throughout. They are following the guidelines, which require 4 questions per hour. And you as a participant are required to be logged in for 50 minutes and answer at least 3 of those polling questions to earn the full credit of 1 CPE. I am your fantastic instructor for this session. My name is Amber Welch. I am a CEO and co-founder of Finsuite Consulting Group, Inc., the creators of the soon-to-be-released Navi AI. I have over 20 years of fintech experience, and in the last 1.5 to 2 years, I have worked with over 300 Web3 companies. The learning objectives for this specific session are to understand the definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, learn some of the key challenges for underrepresented groups in tech, learn the economic impacts that DEI programs have in business, to better understand the full picture of DEI and its place in business, to understand challenges to implement DEI, and to understand solutions to the challenges in DEI implementation. Before I kick off officially with the actual slides and presentation, we've had some additional joiners. So as a reminder, if you participate with asking questions throughout and at the end, your name will go into I say a hat, but it's really going to be digital, let's be real. And it will generate a selection and someone will get a gift card. So participation earns rewards. So as I mentioned, I'm Amber Welch, and today we're here to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but not in the way that you probably are thinking. Before we dive in, I want to introduce myself a little bit further in case you don't know me and let you know more about me and why this topic matters to me on a very personal level. I've been in fintech for 20 plus years, as I've already mentioned. I double majored in college in a combination of computer science and accounting finance. And then I spent some time as an auditor in the public sector before I decided to move into corporate finance. In my largest role, I oversaw a team of 50 plus globally, and I was responsible for over 56 billion in revenues for one of the largest tech companies in the world. I've been everything from the lowest level staff and clerk all the way up to a CEO, a CFO, and a COO for various companies throughout my career. So to put it in perspective, part of why I am so passionate about DEI, and also beyond its impact to me as somebody who identifies as female, I am a 3rd-generation American, and my great-grandparents came from Scotland. My best friend is a 5th-generation Mexican American, meaning she has been in this country and her family has been in this country longer than mine. She's also one of the most accomplished women that I have ever met. Repeatedly, when her and I attend events together, others ask her where she is from. My assumption is it's because she's more brown than me. And they ask her what she does, but not in a curious way. They ask her in a way that alludes to her being required to qualify herself and her importance in their eyes. I've never been asked these questions, or if I've been asked any version of these questions, it's always been from the perspective of courtesy and kindness and professionalism, and not from one that makes me feel as if I need to qualify my place. DEI does matter ethically. However, today we are not going to talk about the ethics. We're actually going to talk about the economics. And what I keep seeing is the same issue with all Web3 companies. Founders do not know what they do not know. It's simple, right? It's an educational issue. But unfortunately, as my company, Finsuite Inc., has and is now building an AI solution for, we realize that this problem actually persists across a lot of areas of Web3: risk, regulation, compliance, finance, and of course, the one that people almost always overlook, DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. So today, we're going to walk through this topic But before we dive into the economics and business reasons of why DEI does and should have a place in a business roadmap, I want to lay out a few of the common issues that get overlooked related to DEI from a broader perspective and give a bit more background for your own education and your own benefit. Just checking the chat real quick. Sorry. So I want to help you visualize a few things. I want you to understand that if you are not part of an underrepresented group, some of the challenges that being from one creates. Now, I'm not bringing this up to create a debate or an ethical discussion, but because I believe that to actually understand the economics of DEI, it's also important to first understand the challenges of those that are impacted by it face. So I grew up in the Midwest in the US, in Indiana, to be exact. And my graduating class from secondary school had almost 1,000 students, which by most standards is pretty large, all of which were white. Now, my family is not all white. My uncle is mixed race, part Scottish and part African American. My cousin is half Vietnamese, and my great aunt and other family members are all part of the queer community. But my family has always been close, and from a really young age, we were all instructed, you don't share these aspects about our family outside of our family, because diversity, equity, and inclusion are not part of the acceptable life in Greenwood, Indiana, where I lived. In fact, there's the standard idea, or you might even refer to it as folklore, though it's not really folklore, in the Midwest and actually in a lot of the US. Some of you may have heard this before, but if a city has a color in its name, then you should probably avoid being there when the sun goes down if you're not white. Now, this idea in towns in Indiana like Whiteland, Greenwood, Brownsville, those are all known sundown towns. And if you've never heard this term, it stems from the racial history in the US, where the idea that if you are not a white man, that you should not be there when the sun goes down, or it could cost you your life. Now, if you are familiar with the racially charged history in the US, and you're probably thinking things like that, like sundown towns, they've mostly ceased to exist since civil rights were established in the 60s and 70s, then let me correct you. Today in the US, there are still thousands of sundown towns, with states like Indiana, where I grew up, and its neighbor, Illinois, having confirmed over 500 alone. It's very much a living thing. In addition to the challenges of DEI in everyday life, there are digital challenges as well. So the image you're seeing on the screen is a screenshot from a virtual meeting through Google Meet. What you're going to notice is that half of the image is extremely hard to see, and the individual shown is hard to view in that half of the image. It doesn't show up as well as the brighter half. But what you may not know is that today, even among our new era of having conversations with things such as OpenAI's ChatGPT, that millions upon millions of people struggle to operate basic functions in their remote work or their regular jobs because the technology built is not built with algorithms to distinguish their skin color or their dialect from their native language if they're speaking in English. Or it may not include their identifiers and pronouns. So as this picture shows, it's still a major factor in a lot of people's ability to work, socialize, and feel equally respected as an employee, regardless of what company or industry they're in. But this isn't just about racial diversity that poses a daily challenge. So when we look at funding for startups, for all female-founded teams, venture capital actually goes to less than 2%. And 89% of total funds are all male teams, according to data shared on Alma's website. Now, Alma is an angel fund that's associated directly with female-founded startups. When you consider female-founded teams that also are minority teams, that number drops to a fraction of a percentage of the available funding. For minorities as a whole, that amount of funding that goes to them from VCs is only 1% for male and female alike. So DEI impacts, and yet it's rarely part of the conversation for founders. These issues started way before anyone entered the job market. And they're not only a US or American problem. So I understand that this graph depicts the decline that we can see in women at companies as seniority rises. But what it doesn't show you is the decline in participation of females in sports, science, technology, engineering, and math, starting and decreasing rapidly around the ages of 11 to 14 years old. This is the reality, however, and as a recent study has shown, starting at around the ages of 11 to 14, when the female body also happens to start to change, the participation of females in sports and STEM programs declines at nearly twice the speed of their male counterparts. There's a whole number of reasons that these declines occur, but the most frequent causes, according to data, are due to lack of access, stigma around their bodies, safety, and being able to participate in predominantly male environments, and a few other things such as lack of notable role models or decreases in the quality of that experience. For minorities and the queer community, there are similar noted accesses for their ability to participate and feel safe in STEM programs as well. One major area of concern is the ability to have access to the same educational opportunities as their white male counterparts as children. So you see, we haven't even dived into the economics, and we still need to understand that the deck is stacked against all of these underrepresented groups from the beginning. And this is just a few. And the few that do make it past these enormous barriers have had to fight their way there. They have to fight for every ounce of ground they gain. So making the importance of the conversation around DEI impactful and more urgent becomes all the more important. Now, I frequently talk about inclusion. If you know me at all, you know I host a podcast about it, and I'm very involved in speaking out about it. And what I see when I am constantly seeking out education around this topic across the board is it's almost always the least attended in talks and panels. It does not matter what conference or event it is, it's got the fewest attendees. So first, for those of you who are attending this session, I want to applaud you, because as a recent quote I shared says, if your actions don't live up to your words, you have nothing to say. And I posted this quote actually in response to a request I had put on LinkedIn about the panel that you're seeing on the screen. The team at Consensus had reached out to me because I had submitted 2 panels to be considered for their upcoming conference this year. And they were going to do a public vote to choose one of a whole number of them for the main stage as a main stage panel, which is a huge opportunity. One of the 2 that I submitted was around finance and regulation. And then there was this one, which was around DEI. And this was the one that they wanted me to promote, that they wanted to include in that vote. And it was on the economics of DEI, just like this discussion is. And between myself and the 3 other ladies, we have thousands of followers on LinkedIn alone. If you look across all our social media, it's significantly more. And so I figured, rather ignorantly, that between the 4 of us, getting the needed votes to be like the top panel and ultimately be chosen for the main stage would be really easy. Now, what I hadn't considered was that while there are a lot of people who are very quick to have opinions on diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether positive or negative, they weren't willing to take 1 minute to go actually cast a vote for a panel about it. Now, at this core, I want to be clear, this isn't about my feelings or about people's lack of wanting to vote for a panel on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it did bother me deeply. And I started really digging into the data more than I already had, because I wanted to understand, how do we move the needle? How do we move the needle that the perception of diversity, equity, and inclusion is not only an ethical discussion, but it's one where founders and leaders will start to realize it's economical. And the more important question to ask And more importantly, to one, is that everyone realizes that they put away their emotions and opinions and have a discussion around DEI that we all need to be a part of. Now that I've said all of that, I'm going to jump into the various data points. But first, before I jump into the data points of why white male founders should be prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion, I want to ask you what comes to mind with these images. Now, most likely, you're probably like, you just said it wasn't an ethical debate. And whatever you're thinking is probably tied to a lot of personal emotions, ideas, possible strong persuasions, things you've been raised around, maybe what you were taught as part of your upbringing or your personal story and experience in life. Now, I want you to take all of those emotions, all of those thoughts, and bury them. Put them away. We're not going to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion in that realm. To talk about it, we need to create education and change. And to do that, we have to remove at least some of the non-data driven discussion and focus on the economics. Because today we are not talking about ethics. And I know I keep saying that, but I want to make it very clear that even though some of what I've mentioned already could be argued that it touches on that, today we're actually going to be talking about facts, data, and numbers. And contrary to what people may think, DEI is an economic discussion, and it does impact the bottom line. So now we're actually going to dive into the real details. I'm going to check the chat again real fast. Hold on one moment. Okay, so as a reminder, we did have a few late joiners. I do want to make sure everybody knows if you submit questions or ask questions either throughout or at the end, your names will be submitted for a drawing for a gift card. So because there was a few additional people that joined, I want to mention that again. So now we're going to jump into the actual data. So to do that, we need to define what DEI even is. At its simplest definition, diversity is the inclusion of individuals from various backgrounds, various identities, and various perspectives that enrich a group's dynamics and their innovation. Equity is fair treatment and fair opportunities for all, actively addressing and removing systemic barriers to equal participation. And inclusion is simply environments where everyone feels valued and able to fully participate. It fosters a sense of belonging and respect. Why is it important for businesses today? Well, beyond what some view as ethical reasoning, there are also real business impacts that most companies never consider. Did you know that over 90% of startups fail? That's a lot. And over 20% of them fail in the first year alone. These are really scary numbers when you're a founder. I am a founder, and it is always at the back of my mind because it's true. Did you also know that as a whole, unconscious bias costs US businesses $550 billion annually? Let that number sink in for a moment. 550 billion with a B. That is the cost to US businesses due to bias. So if you started a company with the knowledge that not including plans around DEI could cost you your company, would it suddenly be more important to your roadmap? The truth is that including diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of your business roadmap and action plan means increased innovation, access to better talent, and competitiveness in a market that others don't have. So let's get into each of those areas and the data that supports DEI as your business being a smart move, not just an ethical debate. Q&A popped up. Lourdes, hopefully I answered the question for you. I will check back though for others. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate your comment. What is the best way to overcome ethnicity issues in gaining quality employment in fintech? I'm actually going to touch on that in a little bit, so I'm going to hold on answering that right now. But that is an excellent, excellent question. All right, so moving on. When I decided to co-found Finsuite, My North Star was not how do we make money. It wasn't even what are we going to sell. My North Star was actually what are our core values? Myself and my co-founder, Stacey Ferris, decided that rather than build a company around an idea, that we would build a company around what we believed. And then we believed that an idea would grow naturally and successfully from that. So this inspiration actually came from this company out of the Pacific Northwest called Gravity Payments. Some of you may be familiar with them. Some of you may not. They actually made the news a number of years ago because their CEO that you see on the screen right now, Dan Price, cut his $1 million plus salary in order to make the minimum wage at their company $70K for every low-level employee. So basically, nobody would make less than that. Everyone can make more than that, but no one would make less. Of course, if you're not familiar with this story, you're not going to know that they were ridiculed wildly for this. He was ripped apart on what is formerly known as Twitter, just tore apart. And you're also not going to know that they actually proved those naysayers wrong, because this decision led to them tripling their revenues and doubling their headcount and customer base. If you are familiar with their story, what you might not know about them is that in recent years, when the US economy got really, really rough, that rather than having to lay off the majority of their workforce, 98% of their employees were willing to take a temporary pay cut in order to prevent company-wide layoffs. Now, this company still exists and is thriving today. This idea is what spawned my want to found a company around core values rather than include them as a checkbox on the website. That is my biggest pet peeve, is that feeling of going to a company's website and feeling like it is just something to say they have it. So we're actually going to start talking profits now, because this is where it gets interesting when we talk about DEI. According to multiple studies, profitability increases significantly with diversity. McKinsey and Company actually did a study showing a correlation between their executive team diversity and profitability. And they found that teams that were in the top 25% of gender diversity were also more likely to have above average profitability than the companies in the bottom 25%. They also found that for ethnic and cultural diversity, the top 25% outperformed those in the bottom 25%. And for that second one, the ethnic and cultural diversity, those profits increased by more than 36% over their peers because they had DEI as part of the consideration. Now, as I explained, I'm an accountant by trade, so we're going to do a little bit of rough, janky math, because if I like to show examples that help tie things together. We're going to have two pretend companies, company A and company B, and they're going to have really modest revenues of $500,000 annually. Now, just so that we can understand the impact of these statistics, if we use that second statistic and company A has better ethnic and cultural diversity, they're going to add approximately $180,000 in profits over our company pretend B. That's more than most angel investors are willing to cough up for a startup. And that's just one area of impact to profit. Now, because I like to really drive the point home, we're going to actually figure in the gender component that we originated with. That adds another $125K in additional profits. So if company A focuses on ensuring ethnic, cultural, and gender diversity using our little hypothetical situation, they could be adding an additional $305,000 in profits over their normal 500. That's a 60% increase over their competitors at company B. That's a lot. And for most startups, that's a significant portion of their runway. Or if they're bootstrapping, it's a hell of a lot more than they probably are used to seeing. So the question we should be asking isn't why isn't DEI that we should be asking is, why isn't DEI a bigger part of the calculation that founders are having when they're planning their companies? All right, we have another question. With AI allowing for smaller, more agile teams, how do you suggest businesses work DEI in at the early stages of business? And how can we continue to support this initiative moving forward? That is an excellent question. I would suggest that Yes, AI does allow for more agile teams. However, DEI needs to be just as important part of the pre-planning stages of startups, the same way that they account for their tech stacks. Hopefully they're accounting for planning their finance and accounting components, although I imagine a lot of people on here that are here for CPE know that that frequently gets overlooked initially. But the way that we get them to involve it in their early stages is show them the economic impact. It really starts with education. And the way to continue to support this initiative, we're actually going to touch on more as well. But to hint at it, it really starts with education and talking about it, which is what we're doing today. Okay, next slide. In addition to making more profits overall, businesses that focus on DEI as part of their company culture and roadmap are also more innovative. So Boston Consulting Group actually did a study on the impacts of diversity in regards to innovation. And what they found was that diversity had a direct correlation to the level of innovation within a company as well. So we're now touching on profits and innovation. Those are probably two of the major factors in every company that this group is touching on. I know it is for every client I've worked with. In fact, they found that diverse teams led to an increase in profits due to the increase in innovation by 19% higher numbers. That's a lot. They also found that these inclusive cultures were 6 times more likely to be more innovative and agile, regardless of AI, Taylor, by the way, 8 times more likely to achieve better business outcomes, and 2 times more likely to exceed financial targets. Again, the question shouldn't be if DEI should be included. It needs to be why isn't it being included? So we're going to shift our focus to risk because with increased innovation, that frequently means increased risk. And so sometimes I hear the argument against DEI because of this, but it's an ignorant argument, as you're going to find out shortly. So Tech Forward Inc. is a mid-sized tech firm that has prided itself on fostering an innovative environment through their diversity. They actually have a workforce that represents like a wide array of backgrounds, cultures, perspectives, and the company has also seen a significant boost in creativity and problem-solving capabilities. Their commitment to DEI has not only improved their product offerings, but it's also enhanced their reputation in the tech industry as a whole. So Tech Forward introduced a groundbreaking software that actually utilized AI to eliminate bias in the hiring process. This innovation was born from their own diverse team's insights and highlighting the unseen biases in the traditional hiring methods. Now, the software quickly gained attention and showcased Tech Forward's commitment to DEI, not only within its own walls, but also as a marketable product that promotes equity to a broader tech community, which we all know is sorely needed. Now, while the innovative software positioned them as a leader in promoting workplace diversity, it introduced new risk. This software, though well-intentioned, faced a lot of scrutiny for the potential privacy concerns and the oversimplification of complex human attributes to these algorithms. So as Tech Forward navigated these challenges, the need for robust risk management became more apparent. Now, framing DEI as being integral in decision-making can support an organization's risk culture, which can be broken down into 3 parts: attitude, behavior, and culture. What is the attitude around this topic? Are behaviors in line with reducing risk? And of course, does the company promote a risk-reducing culture? ERM, or enterprise risk management, and risk management in general is everybody's responsibility. This is an area that teams do frequently focus on, though often gets missed in smaller startups. Now, while that is especially important, what is especially important about risk management is that it's actually everyone's job to look beyond their own role and consider how their decisions can actually impact the organization as a whole. Again, a strong risk culture is every employee's responsibility. So if you feel we've taken a slight detour, let me bring it back around for you. Women on boards have less absenteeism than men. So diversified boards lead to men also having less absenteeism. And more active boards mean better oversight in companies. This equals less risk. So overall, this is just one aspect of how female leadership in companies improves risk management. Females are also more risk averse, according to numerous studies, meaning they take more caution in the choices that they make as it relates to company-wide decisions. I can vouch for this personally, as my co-founder Stacy is far more risk averse than me, and everyone jokingly tends to say I'm kind of dude-like, and so this is kind of my like anecdotal real life proof. Don't know how much that counts, but we're going to go with it. This also overall reduces company-wide risks, and it leads toward better profitability and more balance in company culture, growth, and innovation as a whole. Did you know, though, that market research shows the top performing companies and CEOs recognize the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion to their innovation, their profitability, and most of all, their team's happiness within their companies? A poll of global CEOs done by PwC back in 2015 found that over 85% of CEOs whose organizations had formal DEI programs and initiatives saw improvements in their bottom line. So this pie chart here, the light teal is that 85%, and the purple color is the 15% of CEOs who didn't feel it increased the bottom line having a DEI program. However, major corporations such as Visa, Amazon, Target, Intel, and a whole lot more, which have some of the highest gross profits globally, also have the strongest DEI programs globally. And this correlation hasn't gone unnoticed. A study of the Fortune 500 found that more than 30% of the top 500 companies released reporting specifically highlighting these facts. This is up from only 10% in the previous year. So DEI is on the rise for companies who recognize the importance to their growth and success. I'm going to pause and check the questions, the Q&A really quickly. I also want to note that because it's a holiday, I fully endorse a drinking game for every time I say DEI, because it's a lot. All right. Do we have new questions? Has Board Ready done a study on salary equality? You know what? I am not 100% sure, but I am going to look that up when I get off of here. And if it is valuable research that I find, I will probably add it for future presentations. Nick asked, in crypto, the SEC is typically seen as the bad guy. How do you personally view the SEC trying to regulate DEI? Ooh, that's a meaty question. So I don't know how the SEC would regulate DEI, quite honestly. I do feel very strongly that regulation is needed, and they are trying to wade their way through it. I would say the best they know how, but my personal opinion is there's a lot of emotion that's being part of it. And there are a lot of conversations right now about things like the historical issue with venture capital always being an emotional decision. So to explain what I mean, a lot of times we'll see VC pitches where the decision really comes down to their emotional buy-in on a product. And just like the VC space needs to have better guidelines around removing the emotion from those decisions, I think, in my opinion, that the SEC should operate in the same way with regard to regulation. I don't think that it needs to regulate DEI, although I know that there's plenty of opportunities, which I'll actually mention in a minute, as one of the challenges related to US government grants associated with startups and things like that, that do have to do with some of those pieces. So I don't know if that fully answered your question. If not, feel free to have a follow-up. Another comment or question. I have had several conversations with first-generation women of color that do not understand the DEI discussion because they were able to drive their careers and be successful. Did your research include the differentiation between first generation versus Native Americans and underlying factors? And to clarify, I meant US born Americans. Yes, I'm thinking about how I want to answer this. Yeah, I think this is a really complex question as well, right? We're always going to have situations where we can easily say, there's always going to be a use case against or for something, right? It's um, basically confirming our own bias. So I think it's easy to automatically defer to that. And I think it's more important to go into things with question marks and find ways to bring commonalities to the conversation as a whole landscape instead of one specific anecdote or use case. And that will also, I feel like I keep telling you guys, I'm going to answer it in a minute. And I'm the one that told you all to ask questions throughout, but there is actually going to be some additional context to this shortly. So I hope that provides some answer for the time being. And then hopefully you'll have more thought around that in a moment. DEI also has a significant impact on talent. Employers who post about diversity on social media see a 26% increase in applications from women than employers who post less. The presence of DEI in a brand matters. When applicants are searching for new roles or looking to leave their current role, more than 60% in a recent LinkedIn survey said that whether or not a company has a focus on DEI is a major factor in their interest. Top talent seeks to work at companies who will allow them to attain the goals that they have personally. And those goals frequently overlap with DEI efforts. It's not just about feeling included or looking like the other people you work with, although those are obviously important factors. It's actually much bigger than that and speaks about innovation and opportunity. So employees want to be able to know that where they go, they can maximize their potential. And companies who focus on DEI offer more innovation, they offer more growth, and they offer more opportunities across the board. As an employer, you gain the benefit of nearly a 70% improvement to your retention, in addition to better talent pools. And if you have any knowledge around this, I will, and or maybe if you don't, the point is it takes 1 to 2 years to regain the benefit of any employee that's hired. So increasing your retention to 70% is a huge improvement. So recently, I was chatting with a really good friend of mine who is the founder of a Web3 staffing agency, a female, actually, a really good friend. And we were actually talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion specifically. And the one thing that we couldn't understand is in companies who don't focus on this as part of their roadmap, why they want to limit their pool of talent. To me, that's the conversation from the talent perspective. Of course, as I was mentioning a second ago when the question was asked, there are considerations related to US government grants or sometimes investment money. My company Finsuite ran into this recently where one of the US grants available, the conversation is X amount of the workers US based. So I understand these stipulations exist. However, they're typically met pretty easily without ever having to compromise your focus on DEI as a company. So you really can't prevent your ability to have access to top talent that way. And that's one of the things that we see a lot of times is kind of the excuse. So I want to talk about success. And I know this screen has a lot of numbers. Feel free to read through them if you want, or zone out and just listen to me drone on. A new study by TechTarget's Enterprise Strategy Group, also known as ESG. It was sponsored by Amazon Web Services. They wanted to quantify the impact of a well-executed DEI strategy. So they did a global survey and assessed the DEI commitment of over 2,000 organizations through questions focused on the benefits of DEI for their business outcomes and their performance, so their numbers. Based on the answers, ESG actually classified the organizations into 4 maturity levels: nascent, emerging, evolving, and leading. These levels reflect the degree of DEI that's been integrated. And according to the study, DEI programs can enhance an organization's competitive position, their agility, their innovation, and even their brand perception. So the study also showed, as you would expect, that the maturity level of DEI programs also mattered. So as an organization that had more mature programs, they experienced a higher return on their investment. So I want to touch on two of these because I think like even reading through all of them, they're actually really telling as far as like the economical data piece. So when we consider nation as the newbies and the leaders as the OGs, and their establishment with DEI, we're going to think about the fact that 75% of the OG leaders found a competitive position over their peers, compared to only 28% of the nation, which is like the newbies. Now, 71% of the OG leaders beat their competitors to market by 4 months or more. That's a lot of time advantage, where only 34% of the nation even beat their competitors to market at all. Now, I hope you did take the time to read through a few of the others. I do think that these numbers are really, really interesting. And it really shows the importance of companies that focus on DEI. So I've covered a lot of positives about the ways that diversity, equity, and inclusion create innovation and a fuller bottom line. But what we haven't really discussed is the challenges that companies who actively focus on DEI face. We all know there are always going to be challenges to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, but there are ways to decrease those barriers. Now, right now, only 6.6% of Fortune 500 companies have women as CEOs, and that figure is currently being celebrated as an all-time high. And as the seniority in companies rises, the decline of females correlates, which we previously showed and discussed. Now, if we talk about people of color, the Washington Post found that in the top 50 most valuable public companies, only 8% of the top executives were Black. And at least 8 companies, and this isn't like a set number because I said at least 8, in those top 50 employed no Black executives at all. So we are currently seeing a shift towards understanding the importance of DEI as more than an ethical bargaining tool, but challenges do exist in the way of implicit bias, pushback of uneducated management, the overall need for better data and metrics to actually have companies measure the changes. And we also need better overall strategies to implement these changes. So I want to dig a bit deeper into a few of these challenges and the ways to overcome them, because these are actionable items. Change doesn't happen overnight. Increase the barrier, then there's also a higher probability of change happening overall. So first, diversity, equity, and inclusion frequently is not prioritized. An easy way to improve this is education on the topic as a whole. This means individuals like myself speaking up about it, taking time to put together presentations like this one that go into the details of why it should matter to everyone. It also means individuals like you who are attending this, encouraging others and putting peer pressure, which may catch you off guard that I said that, but putting peer pressure on others who might be less educated on this topic or maybe less open to these ideas in a way that helps them decide to attend, to at least be open to hearing about them. Second, and a huge area of opportunity, in my opinion, is creating programs that have measurable strategies. Now, what I mean by this is that instead of just saying as a founder or a manager, I'm going to hire a more diverse team, taking an initiative to create quantifiable KPIs and tasks around those changes. So measure the innovation and productivity prior to your hiring changes, and then compare it to the results after. Create methods of understanding about the impacts to your bottom line, and then talk about it publicly when you see positive influence. We need to normalize the importance that DEI has through quantifiable benefits. Another area that's still very much a challenge is implicit bias. Now, there's a few steps we can take to improve this, but first, we need to do this. We need to accept that everyone, even those of us here today, have implicit bias to start. So we need to recognize it and acknowledge it, because studies have shown that if you look within yourself and you are more self-aware, this will automatically lead you to being more aware of how you treat others. And then this next one is one that I've implemented personally and have seen a huge impact from, and that is changing periods and exclamation points to question marks. So I mentioned I now live in Florida. I used to live in Indiana. And the best friend that I mentioned that is a woman of color, a Mexican American, when I lived in Indiana, my kids' school was going through a huge DEI controversy. And this was in the midst of COVID and everything else. And I had a lot of questions because I wanted to be a good ally. I wanted to be equitable and I wanted to do the things that helped push the needle in the right direction. And so, what my best friend in the whole world told me was this was her advice. And I've actually found this in the data as well is if you ask questions instead of making statements, it will change your perspective. So, um, I did that. I started asking questions about things, about if I was doing something, instead of making a statement about it, I would ask, how does this come across to you as a woman who is brown versus me, who is a woman who is white and might not have that same expectation? And what I found was that my understanding and my overall perspective grew immensely with questions instead of statements. So, to round out the challenges that we see frequently, we also need to understand the impacts of resistance to change and the support needed from leadership. Sometimes we're not able to move the needle in these areas, and that can be really frustrating. But deciding ahead of time where you're comfortable um, holding firm versus maybe where you need to enter a conversation with more subtlety can greatly impact this whole area of change. If you're a leader, are you creating an environment that encourages DEI? If not, or maybe even if you think you are, what ways can you improve it? And if you aren't a leader, or maybe you're not in a leadership role, how can you help create educational opportunities that aren't inflammatory, that helps move that needle for everyone? So solutions start with speaking up. I've already said this, I will keep saying this. By saying you want DEI at your company, whether you are an employee or a founder. It starts by founders gaining insight into and education around the fact that there are valuable economics associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion for their businesses, not just ethical ones. So each of us has the power to recognize when something is failing or when something is not equitable. And these are coachable moments where we can educate our peers, and they're opportunities to increase our personal value to the companies and communities that we're in. It also equates to better incomes, more opportunities to innovate, more opportunities to stand out from our peers where we're being evaluated, whether you're a leader or an employee. For founders, taking the time to increase your use of diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of your roadmap means you are going to be faster to market with your product. Your product is going to be better than your competitors, and you will make more money. And that's always a pretty sweet thing. So these are huge opportunities to move your business from being in that 90% of startups that fail that we discussed to being in the 10% of startups that succeed. As founders, and I can say this like daily, we are looking for ways that we can squeak an advantage. But why aren't we considering ones like this that have tangible numbers that we can count on and take to the bank? There is a lot of untapped potential in using easily available resources to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion. Google searches offer plenty of programs and free information on how to expand DEI efforts. The image on the screen is just one that I grabbed in literally a 2-minute search. And if you take the time to go look for them, you will find that there are numerous free offerings under Google. I mean, just literally looking up DEI initiatives or DEI programs. There's lots of simple ways that don't even have 13 steps, that have 3 steps or 5 steps to be able to take advantage of that. And there's a lot of different areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion that people don't realize. We typically just assume that when we're talking about that, we're talking about like race or sex or identifiers and pronouns and things like that. But there's actually, when I was searching, you can find lists that include 39 or more different identifiers or ways that you could identify as DEI concepts. So at the end of the day, we can sit back and say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is only a moral, ethical, or political discussion. But if we do that, we're fooling ourselves and we're cutting short our ability to have real impact in the companies that we work for, that we found, and that we lead. DEI is an economical discussion, and it's one with significant impact. Before we dive into the last Q&A and close the session, I want to leave you with a few reminders of everything we discussed because I know that there was a lot. Right now, there's a misconception that the discussion around DEI is only an ethical one and not one of profits, innovation, or economics of doing business. This is untrue. The ripple starts when we are children, especially in the US, but it impacts our choices. It creates barriers to achievements, and it limits not just the individuals who might be specially skilled in some yet unknown way by discouraging them for a slew of different reasons. There are little girls and little children out there who choose not to participate in something that they could have the impact of changing the world with because of these issues. Companies who are trying to change this are seeing positive impacts from the importance of doing that. They are seeing significant increases to their profits. They're seeing increases with the speed at which they go to market and more innovative and better strategized products. The change is happening, albeit it's slow, but this means that as we face these various challenges to this change, it's each of our responsibility to consider the bigger picture. The risk to ignoring it and to not helping it forward is great. So I want to encourage you to be a part of the 10% of startups, the 10% of people that succeed because you include it in your planning. And I want to leave you with a quote from Bill Gates, who I personally think is arguably one of the most successful men in history. As we look ahead to the next century, leaders will be those who empower others. So I have to go over this last little piece. It's required. I am your presenter, Amber Welch. Your questions can be directed to me, amber@finsuiteconsulting.co, related to the presentation. If you would like to visit mine and Stacy's company, you can go to finsuiteconsulting.co for more innovation, for more information, and to learn more about Navi AI. Credit certificate questions can be directed to Brandon at cryptocfos.com. And please visit their website for more information. Now, before we formally close out this session, I want to double check any last comments or questions. Let's see. How can businesses actually measure the economic impact of their DEI initiatives? Also, what accountability mechanisms are most effective? I think we covered a few of them. It really relates to identifying the ways that the different measures companies take can be applied, right? So like one of them we mentioned was hiring. If you're going to hire a more diverse talent pool and say that talent pool relates to your engineers, take measurements ahead of time around the speed at which your product or certain sprints gets completed, and then take measurements after. Same thing with revenues. If you're already post revenue, look at the revenue percentages and growth beforehand over a time period versus after. There's a lot of different mechanisms that can be effective there. And a lot of these tips and tricks you can find online will actually spell out some ideas and probably create more ideas for you. Let's see in the Q&A part. What DEI trends are you seeing in the crypto Web3 space? So this is a great question. I think the biggest thing that we see is this initiative towards including women. And I think it's a little short-sighted in the way that we're doing it, if I'm being completely honest, because a lot of people will say, oh, there needs to not be so many manels, there needs to be this, there needs to be that. But at the end of the day, we want to show things equitably, which means that the panel that I showed you that I had presented to consensus, I actually didn't want it to be all female. I had requested that it be only in part female, and they wanted it all female. That is, in my opinion, not ideal. You want your white male counterparts or your other diverse counterparts, you want everybody at the table showing that they support this diversity. So I think a trend towards trying to include more voices at the table is important. The other thing I'm seeing is from the funding side of things, there's a huge push to include more females at the board level because of the data supports, as I mentioned, the importance of that. And then the same thing at the C-suite level. VCs really want to see companies that are being initiated and founded by females and diverse teams. They are more profitable, and VCs are starting to get wind of that, and they want that in what they see. That closes out the questions. If anybody has anything else, absolutely feel free to reach out to myself or to the Crypto CFO team. I really appreciate everybody that came today and letting me fumble through my presentation. Hopefully nobody is drunk after me saying DEI 5,000 times. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your holiday.